Welcome to Arctic Frontiers 2026. It's a privilege to mark the 20th anniversary of a forum that over 2 decades has built bridges between science, policy, business and society. From a small conference, Arctic Frontiers has grown into a global meeting place for dialogue about the future of the Arctic. This year's theme, Turn of the Tide, reminds us that we are living through a moment of transformation. Across the world, tides are shifting, in geopolitics, in climate, and in the ways we choose to cooperate. The Arctic reflects these changes more clearly than anywhere else. As ice melts and new routes open, and as attention and interest move northward, we are called to answer new questions about security, sovereignty, and sustainability. But changing tides also bring possibility. The Arctic has long been a region where shared interests outweighed conflict. Collaboration has shown how knowledge can build trust, even in uncertain times. Today, global tension challenges that trust. Some nations scale back research cooperation, confidence in international institutions is weakened. Yet many of us continue to believe that knowledge about the environment, societies, cultures, economies, and about each other is essential for rebuilding dialogue. The tide is turning. As we look toward the next 20 years, let us work to ensure it turns towards resilience, peace and sustainable growth for the Arctic and for all who depend on it. Thank you for being here. May these days of Arctic Frontiers inspire new ideas, new partnerships and renewed hope in what we can achieve together.
Arktis får stadig større oppmerksomhet, men overskriftene er ikke alltid de vi ønsker oss. Vi vil bidra til å endre dette. Vi unge er ikke bare framtida i Norden. Vi er en del av nåtida. Og vi lar oss ikke stoppe av grenser. Vi ønsker dere fine dager i Tromsø, og en vellykket konferanse. Og håper at dialogen her vil bringe oss nærmere et steg i riktig retning.
Welcome. On behalf of the Sami Parliament, it is my great honor to welcome you to Sápmi and to Arctic Frontiers 2026, Turn of the Tide. As a representative of the Sami people, I am proud to congratulate all of us on the 20th anniversary of the Arctic Frontiers Conference. This year's theme invites us to reflect on the lives we lead along the coasts. Tides, high and low water, and also form essential conditions for the Sea Sami culture in the fjords and coastal regions. Arctic Frontiers takes place at the same week as the Sami Week in Tromsø. With the Sami National Day on February the 6th, the festival celebrates Sami culture, sports and business with events such as reindeer racing, yoik, handicrafts and markets. I hope you get the opportunity to experience some of this. I look forward to valuable discussions and networking during these days at the Arctic Frontiers. Thank you. Gito.
Welcome to Tromsø. You have arrived in the Arctic capital, and I am so pleased to welcome you here for the Arctic Frontiers Conference. Did you know that we have another capital label going on this year? Tromsø is the European Youth Capital in 2026. This will be an amazing year where we put our youth first and foremost in every issue. Tromsø is a young and vibrant city with half of the population under 35 years old. I am the deputy mayor in Tromsø, and I am myself 25 years old. The project is called True North and is truly important for us now and in the future. I want you to ask yourself, what do you do for youth today and in the future? Enjoy Arctic Frontiers and enjoy Tromsø.
The Arctic, a home between ebb and flow, between high tide and low, between progress and setback. When the tide withdraws, tensions and conflicts are revealed. When it returns, power and stakes pursue. Power, counterforce, east and west. Growing interest from the outside. Arctic was perceived as the dark side of the moon, now a geopolitical hotspot. When Arctic ice melts, climate and global focus change. Floods, droughts, migration, cooperation, defense, resilience. The ice shrinks, new passages open. Trade, transport, control. Those with power over the Arctic have the upper hand. But there is a moment when everything is at rest. The turn of the tide. The moment between ebb and flow. Brief, but regular. The Arctic opportunity. We must dare to seize it and use it wisely. You have heard the words before. Respect, knowledge, and cooperation. The strongest is the one who stands alone, writes Henrik Ibsen. Not here, not in the Arctic, not in 2026. Welcome to Arctic Frontiers, Turn of the Tide.
Yes, welcome to this first session of 3 sessions that we have called High Tide for Arctic Preparedness. Obviously, that was very at the center of the introduction we just heard. So we know the Arctic is not only a hotspot for climate change, sustainable economic development and international cooperation. It has listed in various aspects all the Arctic policies or strategies that we can read from different countries. It's also becoming a hotspot for geopolitical interest and possible rivalry. All these challenges require research that can help us guide our societies to become more resilient and more secure. So the new geopolitical situation with increased international competition and possibly reduced cooperation, all the challenges induced by climate change and increased economic interests, and also increasing human presence, it is obviously a tidal wave where the changes are happening so fast that they need to be addressed in a shorter and shorter time horizon. So we need to build total preparedness and increased resilience to address these tidal forces. And this requires a multidisciplinary thinking and research across disciplines. And it needs to involve the civil society, it needs to involve people's values, and trust in societal functions, democracy and institutions. So this science session invites multidisciplinary contributions across social, cultural, economic, political, technological, legal and ethical aspects of total preparedness. So what I'm going to introduce today is a session. It has been put together by a session committee consisting of high reputed scientists working on preparedness and societal change. It is this first of 3 sessions is going to be chaired by me. I'm Jon Børre Ørbekk at the Research Council of Norway. I am there a special advisor in polar and ocean research. And my colleague Anne, she is advisor at the Department for Democracy and International Relations. And we have it's a lot of many people you can see chairing the committee that you can see on the program. But in physical presence here today is Philip Steinberg. He's a professor of political geography at the Durham University and is also Arctic chair in political geography. And Melody Brown-Berkins. She is adjunct professor of environmental studies at Dartmouth and also director of the Institute of Arctic Studies. And she's also University of Arctic Chair in Science Diplomacy and Inclusion. So we have put together a very interesting program. And for this first session, we have 7 talks this morning. And these talks address various aspects of total preparedness and resilience building in the Arctic. They address societal security and preparedness in Norway, in Finnish defense planning, in exercise planning for emergency preparedness, in local communities and on thawing permafrost, as well as food and energy security in the Arctic. So what I will do as the first keynote talk, I will invite Sebastian Kopf to the floor. Sebastian, just a minute, I just have to swap screen here. Your title is If All is Security, Nothing is Secure. From Total Preparedness to Resilience Building in the Arctic. You've turned a little bit around this challenge. And you are an advisor at the Norwegian Institute of Water Research at NIVA, and you specialize in ocean governance, marine restoration, and Arctic security. Welcome to the floor, Sebastian.
Thank you very much. If all is security, nothing is secure. In fact, nothing can be secure. In exactly 15 minutes, you will know why. Let me start with a story. One that has been published in 1880 by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. It is a poem. It is about time, about movement, about change. But that's not all it is about. It also is about what does remain. What does change, what does remain, what will stay the same in 1880 and in 2026. So let us read through it together. The tide rises, the tide falls. The twilight darkens, the curlew calls. Along the sea sands, damp and brown, the traveler hastens toward the town. And the tide rises, the tide falls. Darkness settles on roofs and walls. But the sea in the darkness calls. Their little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands. And the tide rises, the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in their stalls stamp and neigh as the hostler calls. The day returns, but nevermore returns the traveler to the shore. And the tide rises, the tide falls. It is a poem about time, a poem about movement, a poem about change. One might think it's only about the ocean. I mean, it does mention the ocean, it does mention water. But it's much more than that. It is also a story about politics, a story about society, and a story about how the world, both in 1880 and in 2026, looks north. So let me ask you, what does it actually mean to witness a turn of the tides? To me, it does mean change. There are some situations happening. The tide rises, the tide falls. Some things will have changed. The footprints in the sand Longfellow talked about, they likely will not remain. But some things remain. One thing that does remain is the perception. The perception is this extraordinary Arctic, the backside of the moon, as we have just heard. This is a part that used to stay the same. But with the tides rising and falling again, it has changed. So also the things that change. Today, the perception of the Arctic is not anymore the backside of the moon. When one reads, particularly in the past weeks and months, about the Arctic, there's more and more talk about, when it comes to security, climate emergency. Another topic is a geopolitical frontline. A third one is a digital battlefield. The Arctic is all of this, and much more. It also is a resource frontier. And all these descriptions are partially true. But put all together, they create something new. Something new that is also very dangerous. They turn the Arctic from a place that used to be not that well known, not that often in use, into a place of permanent threat. So when the tide rises and has fallen again, what has changed is the perception. So when we speak about the Arctic today in terms of security, this is not only anymore about military security, protection from war, from invasion. It is about food security, ecosystem security, cultural security, information security, water security, health security, energy security, housing and infrastructure security, economic security, social cohesion security. It has expanded from one very limited thing, war, invasion, to something that encompasses basically everything. And this is exactly where talking about security in every single aspect, health, humanity, culture, information, water, health, again, infrastructure, this is where security itself, talking about security, makes the world more insecure. Because if you think about security, about every single aspect all the time, this has a specific name, which is called securitization. So the word security has expanded until it does cover basically everything. And when it does cover everything, the priorities blur. In fact, the word priorities itself is counterintuitive. In the actual notion of priorities, the word priorities does not make any sense. It does not actually exist. Because the word about priorities is there is one priority. There are not multiple priorities, there is one priority. Once you expand to 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, it is very difficult to focus on the most important thing. And I'm afraid that's exactly what is happening right now, both in the Arctic and also globally, but in particular in the Arctic. Priorities do blur. There are some attacks of diversion. And talking about all types of security with these blurred priorities makes it much more difficult to have an actual secure, livable Arctic. So you might ask, why does this matter? And I thank you for that question. Here's why. It is because perception matters. It is because you matter and how you perceive the Arctic. There's not one Arctic, and I'm not the first person to say that. There's not only one Arctic, there are the Arctics. Can describe and define the Arctic in very different ways, from a social perspective, from a geographical perspective, 66 degrees north. There are very many different ways of describing the Arctic. What matters is the perception. You might have seen the 2013 movie After Earth, and if you haven't, you have missed out, so I encourage you to watch it after this conference. 2013, After Earth. You might note it down. 2013, After Earth. It's starring Will Smith, after all. It does also have one key message. And the key message is very clear, I'm quoting now. Fear is not real. It is a product of thoughts you create. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. In other words, danger equals the objective reality, however objective it can be. Danger, the objective reality. Fear, the mental reaction to this. Danger, very real. Fear is the reaction, the perception, how you, how I, how we perceive the danger. That is what fear is. Let me name a few dangers in the Arctic. One is military buildup. Another one is unstable income. A third one, eroded ecosystems. A fifth one, climate change. And let's add another one, pollution. All of those matter. All of those are dangers. They're not only mental creations, they are actual dangers. And those dangers are dangerous. They are, in the words of the movie actor, they are very real. These dangers are very real, including, in particular, in the Arctic. And there are many reasons for that. And I encourage you to also attend other science sessions who will tell you exactly why those dangers are very real and very difficult to solve, but solvable. These dangers are very real. But, and that's the difference between dangers and threats and fear, they alone do not predict the present. They do not describe the present. The fears don't predict the future and don't describe the present, nor can they ever. They are a danger in itself by being a securitization issue. So securitization does have an inherent danger. It is the perception of conflict being inevitable. Only thinking about security, at some point one might end up in a situation where you perceive as conflict is inevitable and cooperation is naive. What comes with this is the notion of, if one is under threat, I would feel quite threatened if I would be in front of such a bear in nature. It is a clear danger, and my reaction to that would be fear, which also, in wider societies, makes it easier to justify extraordinary measures. Might it be in internal politics or in external international relations? Danger is real, fear is not. In fact, when fear guides one's actions, one risks losing sight of the actual danger. Particularly those like climate change that are getting and becoming more dramatic, but are not that dramatic yet compared to what they will be if one does not act on them. This might make a person go into fight or flight mode if you perceive the threat. And what also comes with this is that you might lose sight of very clear basic realities. For example, that penguins do not live in the Arctic. They live in Antarctica. But when you're faced with a threat, you might forget about basic realities. You might search and look for shelter, not realizing that it's not the danger, it's the threat that you perceive, which makes talking and thinking only about security so dangerous? Because it creates an inherent sense of danger, an inherent threat. So let me make this concrete with 3 realities of Arctic security and preparedness very quickly. Infrastructure, hybrid threats, human presence. Ports, satellites, and subsea cables, they are lifelines. They're physical infrastructures that connect people to, for example, to healthcare, to education, to food. Together, this infrastructure is important for shared use and redundancy. So you need to have infrastructure in order to have a livable, secure Arctic. Hybrid threats, for example, cyber attacks and disinformation, they do not destroy physical buildings. They destroy something that in the Arctic is much more valuable. They destroy the confidence. The confidence in each other, which might lead to one blaming rather each other instead of the aggressor. Which is, again, why it is so important to know the basic realities and to remind oneself about the basic realities. It's important to be able to trust each other and to distinguish between danger and threat. The third one I mentioned is human presence. Outmigration, a lack of opportunities. It is a dramatic danger when the tide rises, has risen, and has fallen again. How will the Arctic look like? Particularly with outmigration and a lack of opportunities. With outmigration, it is hard to prepare preparedness. It is hard to prepare if there's nobody there who can prepare. Let me repeat that. It is hard to prepare if there is nobody there who can prepare. This is not a rhetorical sentence. It is quite literal. With less people living in the Arctic, with more outmigration, with less young people keeping up businesses, local businesses, it is hard to prepare if there's nobody who actually can prepare. So I encourage you to not only think about preparedness, which is difficult about what do you prepare for? What scenario do you have in mind? Do you have a danger in mind or do you have a threat in mind? What do you prepare for? Because preparedness is more than plans and more than emergency plans. It's more about people. It must be more about people, about communities, about indigenous peoples, young professionals, about local businesses, and especially about young people. About more than having a share and a say at the table, but actually having decision powers, being able to raise your hand and actually vote on things. It is difficult to prepare if there's nobody there anymore who can prepare. It is difficult to supply a community if there's no store. It is exactly here where preparedness turns into resilience. One might not be able to prepare for everything, particularly if you don't know what to prepare for, but you are able to make the Arctic as livable as possible. Human resilience requires humans in the Arctic. Safety, preparedness, and resilience all rely on humans wanting to live in the Arctic. One of the key elements in this are healthy environments, healthy oceans and waters. As John F. Kennedy said in 1962, we are tied to the ocean, and when we go back to the sea, whether it is to sail or to watch it, we are going back from whence we came. So, words do matter. Words create perception, perception creates policy, and policy creates reality. If we describe the Arctic as a battlefield, we will create battlegrounds. But if we describe the Arctic as a space of resilience, we will create a space for cooperation. So let me end where I began. If all is security, nothing is secure. So I encourage you to not securitize every risk, but rather note of 3 things. Actually, 2 things. I'm making it even easier. Only focus on 2 things. First of all, your words matter. Secondly, make them count. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. I think it was very nice talk, food for thought on preparedness and resilience. Obviously, it's not possible to have, or wise to be totally prepared. It could not be too secure to be totally prepared. I think I will thank you for the very nice inspirational talk, and go to the next in keeping time. So the next talk will be from Helmi Aurora Rantala. She is at the University of Helsinki, a PhD candidate there. Where are you, please? You're there? Okay, good. And your talk is about resilience in the Finnish security and defense rhetoric, examining colonial underpinnings. Welcome to the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the good speech, and what a beautiful poem that was. It's a perfect bridge to talking about resilience and rhetoric. I brought my coffee cup here with me. I'm Finnish after all. I'm also quite traditional with my papers. Wonderful. So good morning, everyone. As it has become apparent, my name is Helmi, and I'm from University of Helsinki. It's a great honor for me to get to speak about my research today to you. And I'm going to speak to you today about research that I recently conducted together with my colleagues Mario Lindroth and Heidi Sinevara-Niskanen, and we published this about a month ago at the Journal of Language and Politics, in case you're interested in reading more about it after the presentation. How does this work? Wonderful. So, as I'm sure that you're all aware, over the past decade, resilience has really become this buzzword of European security policy discussions. It's often portrayed as something politically neutral or positive or even an empowering idea. It's something that helps societies bounce back and adapt to crises. This is also the case in Arctic Finland that we focused on in our research. Now, I argue that to truly have resilient societies, we have to understand what is meant by resilience. This sounds pretty simple. However, our research really demonstrated that it's far from that. This is because resilience is not just a technical term. It's always about making decisions. Whose resilience we're talking about, who has to adapt, and who defines the threats that we are trying to prepare against. Finland's resilience rhetoric for us was an especially interesting case for a couple of reasons. First of all, Finland is a newly joined NATO member. It's an Arctic state, like Norway, and is also home to the indigenous Sami people, like Norway. It makes it an ideal context in examining how resilience is framed and what that framing reveals to us about power. I've added this interesting picture from the Second World War era from Finland here so that you have something to look at while I speak. So I need to tell you a little bit about the background for you to understand the results of our research. Obviously, if I would explain the full Finland's foreign and security policy and the history of Sami people, it would take us the rest of the week, but I will try to summarize it into a couple of key points. Actually, I kind of wish that I would have a map here, but maybe you can imagine that I'm Norway, and we are now here in Tromsø. We have Sweden and Finland, and then the rest of the room is Russia, which pretty much explains the broad strokes of Finland's foreign and security policy to you. Finland's foreign and security policy has always been very centered around preparing for the threat of Russia. And one way that this is shown is that Finland has always invested a lot in its military. Now over to resilience. Research has shown that resilience and security are increasingly intertwined. This is especially the case after 9/11. Resilience is used to justify policies that relate to things like military, preparedness, uncertainty. However, there's a group of critical scholars that have pointed out that resilience can reinforce colonial dynamics. It can shift the responsibility of having to adapt into marginalized groups rather than addressing structural inequalities. In Finland, this matters because the relationship between the Sami people and the Finnish state remains quite complicated and complex. So when Finland has adopted this new security vocabulary that is centered around resilience, it is important to ask what that resilience means and who is it defined for. Sorry, I have asthma, which makes me think that I should have chosen the Caribbean to research rather than Arctic. So in our research, we analyzed 2 key policy documents from 2024, the Government Defense Report and Government Report on Finnish Foreign and Security Policy. These are 2 core policy documents that really define both internally and externally what Finland's security and foreign policy is. And they were also published after Finland joined NATO. We used rhetorical analysis and especially Stephen Toulmin's model of argumentation to examine how the reports construct the argument that Finland's defense is based on national and collective resilience, which was mentioned in both of the reports. We asked 2 questions. How is resilience portrayed and justified? And how, if at all, are Sami perspectives acknowledged in this framing? I will very quickly show you what the model of argumentation looks like. So this is the skeleton, and these are our results in it. But this is supposed to be, I think, an 8-minute presentation. So I have summarized this into 3 key points for you. First of all, resilience is everywhere, but undefined. The reports mention resilience repeatedly, linked to things like comprehensive security, military defense, cyber preparedness, psychological resilience, crisis response, and economic and health systems. Yet neither of the reports really explain what resilience means in them. It is treated as a self-evident and a universally accepted concept. Oh no, 2 minutes, I'll try to speed up. The argument also relies on assumptions of unity, and the reports repeatedly emphasize things like national unity and a resilient Finnish society. This really constructs an image of a uniform and unified nation that has shared values and shared threats, which doesn't reflect Finland's internal diversity. Our third and last finding was that Sami perspectives are absent from security discussions. Although Finland's Arctic identity was very much highlighted in the documents and the Sami are discussed in cultural contexts, when we talk about security and defense, the Sami are completely absent. This is an interesting finding because of a couple of reasons. First of all, the Sami homelands are very strategically located, as we know here in Tromsø, but also because of the colonial history that is still today shaping the Sami-state relations. The resilience rhetoric therefore reinforces a Finnish maturity perspective and sidelines indigenous concerns. Now, to conclude my presentation to you today, Finland's security vocabulary places resilience in the very center of security and defense policy. But by presenting resilience as a universal and unproblematic concept, power relations embedded in it are completely sidelined. Our analysis highlights the need to critically examine how resilience is used and built to ensure that indigenous perspectives are not sidelined in the process. If there's one thing that I would like you to remember from our presentation today, it is that this is not a question only about indigenous rights. This is a question about having effective resilience and security policy, to understand what that even means for different people. Yeah, 0 minutes, wonderful. Thank you for listening to me today. It's been a great honor to get to present to you today.
Thank you very much. I think we should allow one quick question, actually. Is there a quick question from the audience? I don't see the audience. It's
we
too
can
bright
also
up here.
discuss later during the coffee breaks.
We can attack her during break. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the next is from James Badu at the Nord University. He's a research fellow at the Nord University's Business School. You're going to talk to us about using exercise planning for collaboration and trust building in Arctic emergency preparedness. Welcome to the floor.
Thank you. Hi, my name is James, and I'm with Nord University, the Center for Crisis Management and Collaboration. Today, I'm going to talk to you about, I guess I have it now, how we can use emergency preparedness exercises. But then I'll focus on a very simple thing, which has to do with trust and communication, and how this is very important when we talk about collaboration through building exercises. Before I start, I would like to talk to you about our center, the Center for Crisis Management and Collaboration, in short, NULAB. We are based in Bude, Nord University. We have a student group. I am a PhD student. We also have a master program which runs. Our aim is to create a bigger network where we involve a lot of crisis management or emergency preparedness actors. And we also do our best to have short-term courses, which we call the EVU, lifelong learning programs. These are targeted for institutions and people who are interested. So the fire department or the police can talk to us, and then we create short courses for them. But as a center, our focus is on research. And we see that there's a big gap between theory and practice, and our research is to bridge that gap. So our research is more of practice-based. Most of our research, like I talked to you about, has to do with collaboration, how we can collaborate together during emergency preparedness. We try to focus on situational awareness, how we can create situational awareness among diverse teams. We also try our best to focus on the Arctic because we think we are in the Arctic and we need to play a good role as far as our research is concerned. And through this, we look at trust and communication among actors. There's been a lot of exercises that we have been involved. We organized, our center is made up of very beautiful VR rooms and simulators, diverse simulators that we used in preparing exercises. And we have also been involved in writing reports for full-scale exercises and co. But today, I'll focus now on the topic. Why do we think collaboration is key? Is that when we look at the Arctic, as we've seen from the slides, the initial video, the Arctic is very key. The ice is melting, of course. It gives us a lot of opportunities for transportation and everything. This comes with a risk. It comes with a threat. It's a security issue, I guess. And that means we have to make plans, prepare for these things. We need to prepare because it's also crucial that when we are faced with some of these concerns, it's not just one agency, one institution that is going to work. It has to do with a group of institutions working hand in hand. And then that brings in the issue of trust and co. So we have a project sponsored by the Research Council, and that is Atomics, and that looks at, now that the ice is melting, of course, transportation becomes easy. So we have to think of it, what happens if a vessel in the Arctic have an accident and there are chemicals that we don't want? How do we manage these chemicals? So we have to do with different actors from the Joint Rescue Coordination and other places. But the key point here is that how can we plan and conduct such exercises and again evaluate the consequences of this? Again, putting into place trust. This is 8 minutes, so I will try to run it up quick. But I'll talk about this. We see that exercise planning is very important among many other things. I'll talk about a few of them. One has to do with it helps us create a better knowledge, a better understanding, especially in answering the why question. Why should we do things and how should we see things? And again, it also gives us the opportunity to maximize our learning. How are things going to be? And of course, trust and communication is important. I will zoom into that quick. Now, many a times we see that many people believe that trust is something you get out of doing something, so you don't have to plan for it. It will come automatic by itself. But I guess now if we are supposed to learn anything, we should see that it's something we should really plan for. We should have a strategy that we are building trust. It's not something you get as an add-on. It's something you have to work for now. I guess that's something we should learn. And we have had working an article on this last year, 2024, and we've talked about this, how crucial this is in exercise planning. So before we sit to think of having an exercise, put trust and communication as central before you think of defining the purpose of the exercise. What are this exercise going to be about? You have to look at the impact. How will this influence the trust among the actors who will be involved? At the same time, whilst you are thinking of choosing the scenario, what scenario, how should we draft the scripts, what should go on, who is having which resources, can we have access to these resources? We need to think of, will this improve our trust and communication? So we see these phases, this first part, as where we create the knowledge, and then we also have to plan how do we actually have the exercise. Do we have to think of debriefing activities, evaluation activities? These things we need to plan of it. And we believe this should look at how can this help us actually maximize what we are going to learn from. And again, the core is we should see trust and communication as a strategy. If you're interested, you can read the paper. This is a short presentation, so I'll make it quick. So the key insights here is that planning is important. We need to plan. Of course, we can't plan for everything, but we have to do our very best to plan as we can. And this helps us build trust among actors. It's very crucial. We have to see trust as an important thing. I will try to wrap it up. My time is almost up. But I think we also identify that the interesting thing that crisis actors, policymakers, everyone likes as a boss is to say, I am in control, right? You are in control of the crisis situation. You can manage it. People like to say this, and they don't like it when people tell you are not in control of the crisis. Then it becomes a disaster. But how can you be in control? So we think you can only be in control when you are able to manage the communication among the actors, the agencies that you work with, and how they perceive you as far as trust is concerned. So we also have this research that explains how we can move from being uncontrollable to controllable, which we think is very crucial because policymakers like to say they are in control. Key takeaways: trust is important. We should see it as a strategy and not an add-on, and that we should plan for it during the planning phase. If you'd like to know more about our center and what we do, if you scan the QR code, you'll get to our center and you'll see our resources, our people, and everyone. Thank you so much. Good.
Thank you, James. So we have time for a question or two. Yes, please.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you for your presentation. Just a quick clarifying question. Yes. So does your research focus specifically on the Norwegian interagency? Is this like a review of incident command systems with focus on the Norwegian body in the government? I think it's called the DSB or the Directorate for Civil Protection, like the FEMA equivalent in Norway. Yeah. Does it focus on that? And then what's new? Because normally, I would imagine that Norway is already doing after actions on its coordination in the Arctic. And does it take into account the other disaster preparedness and crisis management exercises of other Arctic nations? So is it just focused on Norway, or is it also the other actors that are in the high north? Thanks.
Yeah, so generally our center has, when we have like the Atomis projects, we have partners from Finland, and Alaska and Canada. So then they all bring in their inputs from how they see the preparedness phases. But of course, from the Norwegian side, we focus so much on the stakeholders over here because, of course, we are in Norway. Yeah, but we look at other Arctic places in projects. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Once again, a hand for James.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next talk is by Jennifer Spence. She's at the Arctic Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Many of you know Jennifer from before. Your talk is about community voices on permafrost thaw.
Yes.
Translating research into action.
That's it, exactly. Thank you very much. Wow, that is quite the light. Has no one said that yet? Thank you very much, everyone. This is a whirlwind. This is a project that's ongoing. I'm here on behalf of a group of people that are working on this, and this is part of what we're calling the Permafrost Pathways Project. But this is a particular collaboration between us at the Harvard Arctic Initiative and the Arctic Athabascan Council. The project has had a number of stages. What I'm going to focus on primarily in this part is a workshop we just hosted in December, so it's quite fresh. But I want to sort of emphasize that I'm not going to be reading to you off my slides, so there's going to be something different on the slides than necessarily I'll say, because I'm not a fan of reading slides. But what's really important here is what we wanted to do was flip the script a bit and talk not less about sort of the translation between research and community needs, and start with the community needs and how that drives research. And when we got into these conversations with the Arctic Athabascan Council, their message to us was along the lines of, all right, that's fine, but we actually feel we have enough research. What we need is help translating that research into action. And so that helped to really define what we were trying to do with this. We weren't trying to define new research needs, but rather look at the existing body of research and really reflect on what is it that communities actually need in this context, which was an important challenge for us to take on. So this particular workshop is the second workshop that we did. The first workshop we did about a year ago, and that brought in researchers who were working with communities and spoke to them about what it was like to work with communities. And this particular one, and you'll see the picture up there, was very much working directly with the communities. So we had representatives from 13 different communities in the Northwest Territories, one from the Yukon, and we had a representative from Sapmi as well, since we're trying to start to build those bridges across. And then we brought them together with policymakers from different agencies in order to start to have these conversations in a really concrete and way. The importance of this was we wanted, recognizing that permafrost thaw and a whole holistic group of issues that communities face. So as much as we're focused on permafrost, we weren't constraining communities to only talking about permafrost, but anything they felt was connected to sort of the changes that they're seeing in their communities. And we wanted to give them the chance to both see what was similar and what was different, because as much as some communities are facing similar things, there's actually quite a rich diversity of experiences. And that's one of the things we wanted to compare and contrast and better understand. And so we wanted to look with these communities, engage them with policymakers, and really look at how we move them into the action phase of things. So this is a very long list, and I will clarify. So all of our workshop that we hosted for 2 days in Yellowknife was very much story-oriented. So one of the challenges we have in the context of bringing researchers together with, and policymakers together with communities is the process of changing or evolving those stories into actions that need to be taken. So this list is the Arctic Athabascan Council, and we have taken a preliminary, we're doing more work on this, but this is actually our translation of what the communities were saying in their stories. But now the exercise will be to really take that away and work with them again to draw out some of these and to bring out some concrete actions. But I just want you to notice that in this list, it's extremely multidisciplinary. So climate change is about land, it's about water, it's about health and culture. We also went from the spectrum of sort of being prepared and what can you do all the way through to crisis management, which we were just talking about, through to recovery. And so it's all the stages. And so we needed to really allow the stories to emerge and to really listen to what the implications of this is. And it's extremely complex. And interestingly, the last presentation on trust, one of the elements that came out very strongly is about the challenges of communication between Indigenous communities in the Canadian North and government representation. And when you're dealing with crisis or when you're dealing with issues of change, how challenging that relationship can be. And so one of the things that we're now looking at is how to support that better communication. So in terms of next steps, because this is just one workshop, we're continuing to work with these communities. We're continuing to work with the Arctic Athabascan Council. And what we're trying to do is draw out actual specific concrete activities and initiatives. Some really strong observations is when we work with the public policy makers in Canada, there actually is money. So a lot of the time you hear, well, there's all of this need for infrastructure, there's need for better education and capacity development. And at the end of the day, the weird part is the money does exist. It's pairing the communities with that money and having the capacity to write these terrible, horrible, long applications, which we all know and have loved for some time. But that's a significant barrier to actually moving forward these things. So we're going to focus on matching communities with money. We're going to look at better ways of improving the community's ability to connect with the right people in departments. So that translation of how do you understand what government is and how do you access the right people. And then we want to actually try to look at these and identify what is generalizable about this. So how can we take the experiences of these 14 different communities that we worked with, pair that with the workshop that we did previously, and also communities we're working with in Alaska in a very intensive way. And what are some of the tools that we can use to bring this out to communities more broadly? And what does this mean for how we can better inform and shift our thinking about what indicators of resilience are in this context if we stop using the data that we have from research and more think about what communities are indicating that they need and what they see the priorities being? How does that change what the indicators of resilience are? So we will ultimately lead to some more generalizable kind of findings and then be able to build out a toolbox for communities in the Canadian and the Alaskan Arctic. And hopefully, we have also been doing some other work in the Sápmi to look at how do we evolve this into something that can be useful to communities more broadly. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we have time for questions from the audience. Is there any question? So obviously co-producing, it is there. Okay.
Hi, thank you. I just had a very quick question on when you talk about change, often researchers and policymakers see change differently from how communities see it. So how did you navigate that discussion? Did you acknowledge it at the start and just move on, or did you spend a lot of time sort of thinking about how different people perceive changes that are happening?
And sorry, what do you mean by change? In what context?
Well, I haven't worked in the Arctic, but working with small-scale fisheries, quite often a researcher will come in and say, things are changing, and communities will respond, they've always been changing. You know, change is actually the norm. It's actually other elements of change, you know, sort of that will erode their ability to cope with the sort of normal changes.
No, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think what I would say is, when looking at permafrost as an example, it's a slow-moving change. And so ultimately, I'm sorry, but that's really brutal. I'm going to step down here. You can actually look at the different rates of change, and that there's multiplier effects. So again, a lot of what we did was through stories. So it's observed change, what communities are seeing, and all of that has to do with both interaction effects, how water affects animals, affects food access, all those types of things. But I'm not sure they would ever articulate it in a way of change or not change. And so really it's taking it in its holistic form, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right, thanks.
We will ask another question during the break.
Oh, I'm walking away with the...
You can with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next talk is from Professor Margaret Brustad. She is a professor in nutritional epidemiology. Sorry. And your talk, we are going to shift a little bit towards food security. So your talk is Resilient North, the interplay between food production, food security, and public health in Northern Norway. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pleased by this opportunity to talk about our project very briefly to you here. And now we have learned that we should be careful with the words we are using. No dangers or fear or whatever, but we should be resilient. Is that right? Because it means cooperation. I like that. So the title of our project is Resilient North, and it's about food preparedness. The subtitle of the project is the interplay between food production, food security, and public health in Northern Norway. And I just want to draw your attention to the partners in the project. It's both academical institutions and non-academical institutions, like the regional governors in Nordland, Troms og Finnmark, and also agricultural organization. The project is funded by Research Council of Norway. I think this sort of goes without saying that there is a new threat landscape in the Arctic. And there are many dynamics and things to be said about that, but the Arctic is of strategic importance due to its resources and its geographical, where we are on the globe, actually. But there is also quite evident that the Arctic is vulnerable. And in this connection, as geopolitical tension in the high north have increased, food preparedness has been highlighted as a particularly vulnerable due to the long distances and the logistic issues, etc., and the climate condition that we have in the Arctic. So let's just look at some hard facts. This is unfortunately in Norwegian, but the symbols are hopefully international. But this is this is based on a report from the county of Tromsø, not the city of Tromsø, but the county of Troms, which is this region where we are right now. And it's about self-sufficiency rate. And the total self-sufficiency rate in Troms County is 7.6%. Which means that the energy that we consume that comes from food that's actually from this region produced or harvested here is only 7.6%. And interestingly, look at fish, 15%. Only 15% of the fish that we eat, or the energy that comes from fish that we consume in this region, is actually processed and distributed here. And when we know about the amount of fish that's actually harvested here, this tells us something about high centralized food system and the vulnerability in that. So, the Resilient North project. I will go very quickly through the components or the different parts in that project to give you some kind of idea of what we are planning to do. So we are trying to define and look at the different threats that we can see in the horizon that might affect food production in this region, in the northern region of Norway. and to make some kind of scenarios based on these threats, scenarios for food production and food availability in this region. And then we will bring this into what we call food security, and I will come back to that term a little bit later. But we will look at how could these scenarios, this threat, creating scenarios of food availability, how could it affect food security for the population living here? But we are not stopping there. We are bringing it into public health. How could this food availability in the population under these different scenarios affect nutritional-related health risk in the population? So, what is the goal for preparedness? From a population perspective, myself, I'm working with population health. So I'm interested in how, that's the hard word to pronounce, epidemiology. It means what is happening in the population. So when you're looking at preparedness in a population perspective, it's about creating a resilient population. In order to lowering the proportion in need of help in crisis. And maybe some of you can recognize this brochure here from Norwegian authorities, that we should be able to have food and water to survive for 1 week. And we also need friends. I'm just telling you that. Food, water, and friends. It's in this brochure. You can read about it. For 7 weeks. On day 8, you are allowed to start to complain. But the first 7 days, keep quiet and prepare yourself for that. In order to reach this goal, we need to have systematic knowledge about the population. And that's where I believe, and my colleagues believe, that the population-based epidemiological studies and surveys and databases that we have in Tromsø at the university here are so valuable, because we have a huge amount of data, not only about diseases, but about behavior in the population, about risk in the population, about social networks, about preferences, about dietary patterns. And we have it for a huge amount of people. Like the Tromsø study, which has been going on since the 70s, and approximately 70% of the Tromsø population beyond the age of 40 has been participating. And the Norwegian Women and Health study, where we have data, dietary data from more than 100,000 women. So, in epidemiological research, we are looking at, in the classical way, we're looking at lifestyle, living condition, choices, behavior, and diet. And then we are looking at how this is associated with health and diseases in the population. So, faced with this new threat landscape, we are trying to do analysis. How could this threat, crisis, and scenarios likely affect lifestyle, living condition, etc.? And then we can do statistical modeling to see how this potentially could affect health risk in the population. So, food security. You know, we have plenty of fish in Norway. We have enough fish so every one of us in Norway can eat fish 16 times per day. Okay? But that doesn't mean that this fish is on the table for everyone. We know that there is a vulnerability today in the population in peaceful times. We believe that in crisis, this vulnerability could be even stronger. So food security does not necessarily mean nutritional security for everyone. But we believe that epidemiological data can help bridge the gap between food available and food actually consumed in the population and in different population groups. So the overall aim for Resilient North is to strengthen food and nutritional preparedness in the North and to contribute to a resilient northern population in uncertain times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margret. Is there a hand from the audience? Want to have a question? I think everybody wonders why the self-sufficiency is 7.something%. It's extremely low. Can you draw a little bit more around that? why are we in such a bad situation?
It's the food system issue. It's how everything is designed when it comes to how food is supplied. The main storage for food in Norway is around the airport, or Gardermoen. And most of the food is not stored anywhere. It's on the roads, in transportation. And yeah, so it's a food system issue. But right now there is a working group nationally working on the Norwegian food system. And of course, preparedness and these figures are on the table.
On the menu?
On the menu, yeah.
Okay, thank you and good luck with the project.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next talk is from Frøydis Gillund at the Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy and Research, NIBIO in Norway. Your talk is about also about food production, security and preparedness in northern Norway, actually. Welcome to the floor.
Thank you. I just need to know before I start, I press this to change the slides.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Food security is the most critical societal function that under all circumstances, now and in the future, always must function throughout the entire country. This statement was made by Swedish authorities when they launched a white paper on food preparedness in 2024. And I often refer to it to underline the fundamental importance of food security. As was said, my name is Frøydis Gillund, and I'm a researcher at the Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy Research, NIBIO. I'm based here in Tromsø, and I lead one of the work packages in the project Resilient North that Margrit Brustad just presented. And with Northern Norway as our context, we ask, what is the potential contribution of regional food production to food security? And how is this potential affected by important conditions and drivers, policy frameworks, both due to long-term change, such as climate and demography, but also sudden crises, including war and severe disruptions in supply chains? Primary food production play a key role for settlement and employment in Northern Norway. The region has rich natural resources which provide favorable conditions for food production, both from aquaculture and fisheries, and agriculture and reindeer herders. In fact, Northern Norway, and thanks to the Gulf Stream, has the northernmost agriculture in the world. And production volumes differ significantly across these sectors, and also within the region. Fisheries and aquaculture dominates in terms of volumes and exports millions of meals every day. Agriculture is primarily based on livestock, grass-fed livestock for dairy and meat production, and primarily targeting regional and national markets. But with what Margrit also illustrated very well, despite this richness in natural resources, less than 10% of the food that we consume here in Troms is actually produced and processed here. So the food system in Northern Norway is vulnerable, and it's shaped by complex interactions of both policy frameworks, climate and ecological conditions, demographic changes, technology, infrastructure, and market dynamics. Climate change creates increasing uncertainties. Warmer weather may benefit parts of agriculture, while rising sea temperatures threatens fish stocks and alter their distribution. And declining number of farmers and fragile transport and processing infrastructure increases vulnerabilities. And we will analyze how production volume are affected by these key conditions and drivers, and how regional food production can contribute to regional food supply under normal conditions, during crisis, and long-term change. We will combine different methodologies. First, we perform a literature review to identify these critical conditions and drivers. Then we will conduct statistical and qualitative assessments on data of production volumes and indicators of these conditions in order to assess their impact and predict and estimate the potential for food production. We will engage with stakeholders to quality assure our analysis and to assess how food production can be affected in different scenarios. That would include climate-driven events, demographic development, supply chain disruptions, and geopolitical tensions. And finally, we will discuss the policy implications of our results. So what are these critical conditions? Here I listed some factors that could rapidly reduce production potential if they become scarce or less available. Across all sectors, power and energy supplies, digital communication, logistics, and essential equipment is crucial for maintaining production. Aquaculture and dairy production both depend on non-local concentrate feed, which is perhaps particularly critical for aquaculture. Furthermore, aquaculture needs water of good quality and effective disease and parasite management. Agriculture needs seeds, fertilizer, plant protection, and medicines. So this all shows how the production is very dependent on input factors that come from outside. Still, what makes agriculture in northern Norway most vulnerable, I would say, is the decline in the number of farmers, which has taken place more rapidly here than anywhere else in the country. In the last 20 years, the number of farmers has more than halved, from 6,000 to less than 3,000 today. Key factors for fisheries are fuel and access to fishing ground and landing processing facilities. Acute events such as bad weather, emergency closures, sudden price or currency change, and closed fish reception facilities represents risks. So in conclusion, Northern Norway has a potential to produce a lot of food, but the food system is vulnerable. And we aim to provide knowledge that helps decision makers better understand how regional food production can contribute to food security and the policy measures that are needed to support this. Ultimately, our goal is to support a more resilient North, one that can adapt to uncertainty and continue to provide food to its population and ensure public health, even when the world around us is becoming increasingly unstable. And if you want to hear more about food security in the Arctic and how research across the Nordic countries can contribute to achieve this, I encourage you to participate in this side event that NIBIO is organizing together with UiT. It takes place here at the Edge at Arbeidskontoret 2 after lunch today. So I hope to see you there. And I will end by just saying thanks to all the researchers from Nofima and NIBIO and UiT that I get to collaborate with in this project, and also our partners. And thank you for listening. And I hope to see you again. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Fredis. A question from the audience? Could you shortly reflect a little bit on the matter of transport and logistics in this field? It was mentioned also before, I guess, most of the food that we require for the salmon farming, for example, is imported.
Yeah.
So how important is that issue in your research questions?
Yeah, so we focus on the potential of producing food here, but then in these scenarios, disturbance in the supply chains is essential, and that really determines particularly fish farming, but also, as I said, parts of the agricultural production is very dependent on supplies from outside. So that's a huge vulnerability when it comes to kind of defining the potential of what we can produce, at least on a long-term crisis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Frøydis. The next talk is from Magnus de Witt. He is a research assistant professor at the Alaskan Center for Energy and Power. So now we're turning our attention to energy security with perspectives from Iceland, resilience and vulnerabilities in high renewable contexts. Welcome.
Hello and welcome, dear distinguished guests. And first of all, I would like to thank Sebastian for his great introduction and especially for the key takeaways. And I really like the point of that you can be over-prepared. And from my personal experience, I think it's really important that we are going open-minded with open eyes through the life and through academia. And that's the reason which brought me here, because I never thought that I will end up in energy, but 10 years ago, by accident, I ended up in energy in Iceland, and I fall in love, and that's how this research came to life. This research, it's from a book chapter, which I wrote with my colleague Hlynur Stefánsson from Reykjavik University. And I think energy, it's the backbone of modern societies. And in the previous presentation on one slide, we saw a lot of implications of energy, either in terms of electricity, as fuel, or as heat. So we often need energy even for food production. So after we got our stomach full, now I hope we can get our room a little bit warmer with some good energy. And I am the last obstacle between the break for your personal food security point. So maybe Iceland, it's a very unique point. I think it's always a role model in the classroom when we are talking about sustainable energy. And often we hear that Iceland, it's so unique. We have the very unique geology with a high geothermal potential and the hydropower, and it's a small population of approximately 400,000 people. But I'm not sure if it's really so unique as we often think. So maybe in this presentation we can shed a little bit light on what can we utilize from the knowledge from Iceland maybe to other regions like my current base, Alaska. So if we take a look on Iceland, we see that it was a long way to get to this point where they are, where a lot of energy is generated renewably. So if we take a look nowadays, approximately 99% of electricity is generated by renewables. And in terms of heat, we can see that 70% is generated by geothermal and a little bit is generated by electricity. And this was not always this. So it's in approximately the 1930s till 1950s, Iceland started with what they call the first energy transition, where they moved from local peat utilization for heating and utilizing coal for heating the homes to local geothermal resources. Then a little bit later, it was a little bit after the oil crisis in the 70s, Iceland realized we have a huge potential in local hydropower and geothermal for electricity generation. So after the 70s, in the second energy transition, the electricity sector of Iceland moved to its nowadays 99% renewables. And it's only just 99% because in some remote areas, due to emergency generators, they need a little portion of fossil fuels as backup resource. But if we take a closer look on the primary energy Iceland is utilizing, we still see a fraction of 14% of primary energy which is coming from fossil fuels. And this is mainly due to transportation sector. And if we take a look back to the previous presentation for agriculture, we see that there's a lot of fuel needed either for vessels, for tractors, for land-based farming. So this is something I will touch later in my presentation. So if we take a look on the demand side for electricity, we see that Iceland is very single-sided. Approximately 80% of the electricity utilized in Iceland, it's going to a very few companies. It's 3 companies, 4 factories, which are using 80% of the generated electricity. And this is dominated by aluminium smelters. And of course, if you have such a few large consumers in the system, it creates a lot of risk, because if one of these large consumers breaks away, this has a severe impact on energy security, because there is no one who needs this huge amount of energy, and this would change the price structure. The grid, I just want to briefly touch it due to time limitations. So it's a relatively weak grid because Iceland is relatively large and the inner part of Iceland it's not inhabited. But still, they managed to have a very high reliability with low outages. And I talked a little bit about heating before. So we see that it's mainly heated by geothermal district heating systems, and the rest is heated by sustainable electricity. So that's why we see really low volatilities in the price structure in terms of heat, because it's all local resources. So they are not dependent on the global market. And this is very important nowadays, where we have a lot of global tensions. And still, we have a lot of risk. And a big risk is the resource itself. Iceland is heavily utilizing geothermal, but geothermal is often related to volcanism. And a volcano is always a source for risk. And in 2023, the volcanic eruption happened, or ongoing eruption, happened close to the Svettingi power plant. And this really took a lot of effort from Iceland to kind of move the lava flow around this power plant, because if this power plant would go offline for the electricity, it would be a minor impact, but it would have been a heavy impact for the district heating system. And living in the Arctic, if you are without heat, it's a big problem. So before I promised you that I want to come back to the fuel for the transportation sector. And that's, no, it's the right slide. That's the so-called third transition. So we had already the transition for the heating sector, we had the transition for the electricity, and now Iceland is looking forward to decarbonize the transportation sector. And of course, there are 3 different areas. It's a land-based transportation, where we can see already a lot is going on. Approximately 11% of the fleet is now electric in Iceland. Then we have the maritime transportation sector and the aviation sector. And of course, these sectors are a little bit slower moving forward. So it's a long plan up to 2050, where Iceland wants to be more self-sufficient. And this would require much more energy, and Iceland has a vast potential of renewables. So they are looking into options how they can electrify as much as possible, either with direct use of electricity or with e-fuels or hydrogen production. Of course, this would increase the demand, and if you increase the demand, then you would need new capacities. And this would require upgrades in grid infrastructure, in generation infrastructure, and this will be a huge effort for the Icelandic society. Since I already saw the sign that I will get kicked off the stage, so I just want to give you 3 key takeaways. Renewable abundance doesn't automatically mean 0 risk. So even if you have the abundance of energy resources, you still have some risk implies. And for Iceland, the biggest challenge is the transportation sector. How can they utilize the local resources? And how can they upgrade the grid to accommodate this electrification of the transportation sector? And of course, it's always very important to manage the demand. If you have any questions, ask me now or tackle me later at the coffee stand.
Thank you very much, Magnus, for an interesting talk. Do we have one question for Magnus? I think Iceland is obviously a special case with also risks, although it is 100% almost 100% renewable. Is it similar to the Norwegian situation, or is it other countries that could be in a similar situation?
Not at the moment. I think the Norwegian situation is pretty similar, but I think the grid infrastructure is very different between Norway and Iceland. But I think both regions have a lot of problems with end of the grid situations, where energy security is very fragile, especially in the West Fjords in Iceland or in some Norwegian fjords. And I think there is a lot of improvement needed.
Okay, thank you, Magnus. And this is the end of this session. I hope many of you, maybe most of you, will also join the next second session of this High Tide for Arctic Preparedness. It starts at 11 o'clock in the same room, and there is a third session also in the evening. So thank you very much for everybody, and give a hand to the second.